I'm Dan, I'm in my 30s, and before this season I had absolutely no experience of racing pigeons, but I did document it, so there's loads of videos on my YouTube channel that you can watch now. I can honestly say that I'm hooked. If you've clicked on this video, that suggests that you have at least some interest in the sport, and I'm going to do my best to give you an idea of what you need to do to get involved, some of the things to consider, an idea of cost, time, and the equipment you're going to need. Now, I don't know if it's just an English thing with historical class structures, but the general response I got when I first told anyone I was interested in racing pigeons was mostly a negative one. Filthy things, said my nana. Why would you want to do that, said most of my mates. As long as I don't have to look after them, said my wife. Can I have some, said my kids. But if you're even thinking about getting some birds yourself, or are interested in what the sport is about, ignore the naysayers. Chances are they don't know the first thing about it and are just repeating the opinions of someone else who hasn't the faintest clue about racing pigeons. Honestly, if you're like me, a guy looking for a sport or hobby that you can really get your teeth into, you like animal husbandry, you like being outside, and maybe even win a few quid, don't worry about the reputation and stigma pigeon racing once had. Things are changing. Now, I'm a big sports fan. I'll watch anything from football, rugby, Formula 1, boxing, but I'm rubbish at all sports. Equally, I couldn't afford to buy a Formula 1 team, couldn't buy a football team, even greyhound racing is out of my price range. But pigeon racing, if it's good enough for the Queen, then it's good enough for little old me. So I've got hours and hours of video footage, but only one measly season of young bird racing under my belt. But I thought that it might be enough to help other new starters with their questions. So I'm going to run through this as quickly as I can for YouTube, though when the documentary is eventually finished, which is something I'm working on in the background, it should be more comprehensive. Subscribe to the channel and join the Facebook page to find out more about that. So here we go. I might sound a bit scripted, but that's because I'm reading a script and I struggle to talk in my natural way even when I've written it myself. But by writing this, I can make sure I get the main points across in the video without missing anything crucial. Disclaimer, the info and examples I give in this video are for racing pigeons, not one-loft racing or fancy birds or loft flying. Also, I live in Nottinghamshire, England, and my union is the RPRA. So your local union or governing body may have slightly different rules, but from what I know, they're mostly the same, so the video should be useful to you no matter where you live in the world. Also, because this is important, if you like this video, please share it on your Facebook page or email it, WhatsApp it to anyone who you think might like to get into racing pigeons, or anyone that already races pigeons, and get them to pass it on to anyone they know that might want to get into racing pigeons. If you're confused, don't be, just share out of it. We're really trying to reverse the decline in participation. Truth be told, most flyers are getting on a bit and either retiring or unfortunately just dying. So we need new people to join and fly and to compete against to keep the sport going. Now, assuming you already know the basics of pigeon racing, if you don't, it's briefly a bit like this. In its simplest form, you have a shed full of racing pigeons that you have never flown. These are young birds. You train them to learn that your shed or loft is home. And as they get older, they fly further away, but always come back to their home. Whilst they're learning the ropes, the racing season will have already started for the other members in the clubs who have older birds. Once their season ends, your young bird season begins. You will take your young birds to a club along with everyone else in your area, pay an entry fee. Our club charges under £1 per bird, and the club will then send all the birds away to the race start point. It starts at a relatively close distance, 50-60 miles, and the race distance then starts to increase as the birds become more experienced and the season progresses. The following day, the birds will all be released at the same time and they should all race back to their respective homes. You wait nervously, scanning the sky, checking your watch, ringing your friends to see if any of their birds have arrived, and eventually you'll see a bird come by, tuck its wings in, and it comes down to your loft, and it's really, really exciting. You'll see other birds fly over and they're not yours, that's demoralizing, but sometimes you'll just get a surprise and it's a really great feeling. You will have a digital clock and a sensor in your loft, and as soon as the bird enters the loft, a microchip on its leg, a little bit like my watch, will register the time, the exact time that that bird enters the loft, and the clock stores that time. Later in the day, you take the clock back to your club along with everyone else, and they work out which birds flew the race distance in the shortest time. If you lose, you congratulate the winner, think of some excuses, the weather, training, the position of the moon, but if you win, straight off to the Ferrari dealership. So the most common question I see, and what I ask myself, are up next. How do I start? How much time does it require? How much cash will it cost? So it's really a sliding scale. You can just convert your garden shed, get a small team of young birds, and get racing. And that's probably the best thing to do, and not too dissimilar to what I did. A small team and a single loft might only take 10 minutes of your time each day. If you loft fly daily and train them regularly, which you will have to do in racing season, especially if you want to win, then it could be an hour or 2 hours a day. Location. First thing you need to decide is where you want to keep your birds. If you want to keep them at home in your garden or yard, you will have to check a few things. Number one, if you rent, you may need your landlord's or housing authority's permission. Number two, if you intend to have a big loft, make sure you're following any planning laws. Most UK planning authorities are fine with a standard 12 by 8 loft. Some are fine with 32 feet lofts, but just check, it's only a Google search away. Number three, your neighbours. If you get on with them, it'll be fine. I have 4 neighbouring properties and they all like the fact that they can see the birds flying in formation. However, if I had a problem neighbour, then I can see how keeping pigeons in my garden would be fuel to the fire. Noise. Site the loft away from neighbouring houses or windows. The cooing of the cocks is quite a relaxing sound compared to jackdaws, crows, dogs and kids, but not everyone will welcome it at 4 AM in the summer when their windows are open. Alternatively, you can have your loft on an allotment garden. A lot of big lofts do this. Where I grew up in the mining towns of Nottinghamshire, the allotments were full of big lofts. Just be aware you'll need power for your clock and any lighting, and you will be there most days, all year round, snow and mud included. Also, allotment lofts are more vulnerable to vandalism and thefts. Unfortunately, I've seen a few posts this year where people have had their lofts burned down. Most seem to be on allotments, but that might not be exclusively. Bottom line is, think about security. The loft itself. You're going to need a suitable house for your birds. They're called pigeon lofts, and you can buy proper wooden lofts from a bunch of suppliers, loft builders. Feel free to link your website or Facebook page and I'll post it in the description below. Please include the country and area. Everyone else, check the description below for links to loft builders. I think this is worth doing because it's quite hard finding them. Most lofts will have rooms or sections. I built my own first loft and I had one dividing wall in the middle. Each section is approximately 6 foot wide by 8 foot deep. Pigeons generally need at least 2 square foot per bird. Having sections means you can separate the birds by sex and age. My loft was fine for my first year as I only had young birds. Next season those young birds will become yearling. I'll need to find room for them or the new young birds plus any stock birds I may decide to buy in. This is about the 8th time I've read this and I constantly keep fluffing my words. So you need a loft with at least a couple of sections. You can pick up a new one in the UK for around £1,500, maybe that's $1,800. I don't know how much they are in America, probably a lot cheaper. You've got more natural resources than we do. You can buy a second-hand loft for a lot less. Just be aware that a lot will need repairs around the bottom planks and floor, as that's where they're most likely to rot. If you're handy with tools and you can erect it yourself, this might be a good cheaper option. Alternatively, do as I did and just build yourself one. You can also convert a standard shed into a loft. The loft needs to be raised off the ground, ideally by a foot or 30 centimetres to help prevent damp and importantly stop rats and mice living underneath. It's best to have it facing south or west if you can. Mine faces north. Try not to have it directly under telephone wires as birds can hit these. If you don't have a choice, try and get cork circles fitted over the wires. Some telephone authorities will do that for you. Or if you live in a 1980s housing estate, then just tie a pair of old trainers together and sling them up over the wires. You'll also need a way of getting the birds back into the loft. This is called a trap and can be simple bob wires like what I have, or more fancy systems like Sputnik traps. One thing I wish I had is another small holding section between my bob wires and the main loft sections, like a corridor. And this is just so that I can let latecomers into the loft without worrying about letting cats, stragglers or hawks into the whole loft itself. It helps identify which birds come in late, as usually you'll get some arriving after you've taken down the electronic timing system, which records the bird and its race finish time. Going solo or team up. So whether you want to fly by yourself or whether you want to do it with a mate or a family member, that's one thing to consider. It's a lot of work, especially if you want to win. If there's somebody there to help share the workload, then that can be super handy. A lot of unions will still charge you double fees, even if you're in a partnership, one fee per member. When to start? So this was one of the biggest things for me actually. When I didn't know anything about racing pigeons, I had no clue as to when in the year I could start, because obviously there are seasons. Now, if you want to be starting with young birds, which is the most likely way into it, like I said, it's the only way into it really, isn't it? If you want to start with young birds, then you're going to have to plan in advance, because you want to have your loft set up and order your young birds before they're paired, before people start breeding their young birds. That's the best way. Otherwise, you can still do it closer before the race season starts, but the sooner you can start thinking about it. Our race season started in August, September, and I started building my loft in October, November the previous year, and my birds arrived in March, which you'll see again in the videos. So I was training them up, I was training myself before the race season started, and that was super handy really. This coming season, 2023, that will be my first old bird racing season. I'll have my yearlings, and then straight after that I'll have my young birds. So the season will be twice as long for me, and probably twice as much work too. But I just went on a tangent there. Let me say what I've said, what I've written. I started with young birds. Young birds are basically racing pigeons born on that year and will race against other young birds in that same year. You can buy, or often will be given, young birds for your first season. The temptation, and I had this temptation myself, is to buy in stock birds and breed your own young birds. Honestly, unless you have previous experience, I would avoid doing this. You can spend a lot of money on something you don't really know anything about. I went to a pigeon show and an auction, and some of the cheapest birds they were selling there started at hundreds of pounds, and every pigeon looked the same other than the colours. I didn't really know the difference. If you join a club, they will likely welcome you with open arms, especially if you're a new flyer, and there will likely be 1 or 2 top flyers in the club who will be willing to breed you some young birds if you give them enough notice. Some may charge 20 quid or so per bird to cover the cost of corn, etc. The members of the Not South Road Federation were excellent with me and bred me my first young bird team. It was all gifted, or they were all gifted. But don't expect that to be the norm, it might not be. I was given a lot of great advice from the members of the Not South Road Federation, and there are 2 bits that I want to pass on. Try and get all of your young bird team at the same time, or at least within 2 weeks of each other. This is harder to do in reality, as you will get the birds when they're good and ready, and you can't be picky if they're given to you. But don't do as I did and accept the young birds over a month after the first one arrives. Despite my best efforts, the later additions fell by the wayside on training tossers because of illness and races. They just weren't as prepared. Whereas I still have all of the first batch that I got were from my mentors, other than one mishap with the inoculation and another that was taken by a sparrowhawk in its first week of flying around the loft. It's harder for the new birds to catch up unless you're retired and you have separate sections and time to train multiple groups of young birds. Then yeah, I would just give yourself a cut-off date. Again, disclaimer, this advice is what I was given, but I failed to follow, but I should have followed it. The second piece is don't take birds from lots of different lofts. If you can get a dozen birds from one loft and a dozen birds from another loft, then that's ideal. You're still getting a selection of birds from different lofts, but you're not introducing as many different pathogens into the loft in one go. Think of them like kids. As soon as they go back to school, they all bring germs from wherever they've been on holiday and family visits around the country, and a week later the whole class is ill and they all bring it home and we get ill. The same goes for pigeons, but they're more likely to die. Next thing, join a club. As I mentioned, if you want to race in clubs, which is a good starting point, you will need to find and join one. Quick Google will show you the relevant governing body in your area, and their website will have a list of all the clubs affiliated to them. Find a club local to you and ring the secretary. They will tell you if you're within the boundary. Clubs all have boundaries that lofts must fall within, and they'll probably invite you to the club to chat things over. I highly recommend doing that. And your union membership and club membership will usually cost less than £100 per year for both. Join a governing body. You're going to need to do that to get yourself a loft number, and you need the loft number so that you can race. When birds are sent to a race, all the birds entered into the race have the same start point. This is called the liberation site. They're released all together at the same time, but they have different endpoints. Your birds will race back to your loft, which might be 5 miles closer to the start point than the next member in your club. So the governing body or racing pigeon organisation in your area will allocate you a loft number that is linked to the longitude and latitude of your loft. The club secretary will use your loft number to find out where your registered loft location is, so they can work out how quickly your birds completed the race. It's basically distance of the race divided by the time taken to complete. The result is the velocity, and the bird with the highest velocity in the club wins. Brings me on to the electronic timing system, or ETS, or clock, as I mentioned earlier. Some clubs still use the old-fashioned manual clocks and rubbers. Whilst I quite like that idea, the reality is that you're going to need an ETS. There are a few main brands, Bricon, Unicon, iPigeon and Benzing. I would wait until you've joined a club before purchasing an ETS. It's better if you have a system that the club is familiar with or are willing to integrate with. In its simplest configuration, the ETS will have a clock that records the birds entered into the race, like each bird registration number and the race point that the race starts from, and a sensor pad at the loft location, and the clock is connected to that so that when the bird returns to the loft, it records the time. A second-hand ETS system is around 150 quid. whilst a brand new starter kit will be anywhere between £300 and £800. I bought a second-hand Brickon, and whilst the technology feels dated, it does a job, and it cost me about 180 quid for the clock and 2 pads. So just to recap, you know that you're going to need a loft. It could be free, could be 300 quid, could be 1500 quid for a new one. Join a club or a governing body, approximately £100. Get yourself a bird team. They could be free if the members breed them for you, or you might be paying £10 to £20 per bird. Buy an ETS system, so 150 quid to 800 quid, or if you can borrow one, then that saves you some money too. So there's loads more to add to this, but it looks like I'm going to be running out of time, so I'm going to need to make a part 2 to this video if this video is popular and worth doing. In that, I will cover baskets, training, health and medication, other equipment, and the first race. So I hope you find that useful. Again, please like, subscribe, tick that little bell and notification so that you get a notification every time I release a video, which isn't very often. Like I say, if you know anybody that's interested in racing pigeons or wants to know a little bit more about how you get involved, then feel free, send them this video, and hopefully we'll get more people into the sport. Cheers guys.